The alien Overlord stood tall, towering over the frail human diplomat who dared to speak before him. His 4 red eyes glowed with contempt, and his mouth curled into a cruel smile. The nerve of these creatures! They believed they could challenge him, a being who had conquered worlds, who had crushed civilizations beneath his heel without breaking a sweat. He had wiped out entire species with a mere thought, reduced planets to rubble with a flick of his wrist. And now, these insignificant humans had the audacity to send a representative to demand peace. The human's voice trembled slightly, but he continued. "You can't win this war, Overlord. We will fight until every last one of us is standing." The Overlord's laugh echoed through the grand hall of his warship, a sound that sent chills down the spines of his generals. "You think your pathetic species can stop me?" His voice was like 1,000 storms, carrying an arrogance that could flatten mountains. "You may have risen from the dust of your insignificant planet, but you are nothing in the grand scheme of the universe. You've had your time, little human, but it's over now. I am your end." He waved a dismissive hand. "Take him away. I grow bored of these foolish talks." The diplomat was dragged from the room, but the Overlord's attention never wavered. He stared out the large window, watching the stars streak past as his flagship cut through space. His thoughts were calm, calculating. The humans had sent their best negotiators, their brightest minds, all to try and delay the inevitable. But no matter how many ships they launched, no matter how many armies they mobilized, they were doomed. The Overlord had already defeated countless species far superior to these fragile apes. Earth was no different. It would be his next conquest, and then it too would be nothing but ash. A soft beep from his console interrupted his thoughts. A communication came in one of his officers. The Overlord pressed a button, activating the feed. "What is it?" "Lord, there's been an unexpected development," the officer reported, his voice strained. "We've detected a fleet of human ships, small, but they're moving toward us." The Overlord's laugh was immediate, cutting off the officer mid-sentence. "A fleet? How quaint. Let them come. I will wipe them from existence as easily as I swat a fly. They are too predictable." "But, my lord, the fleet isn't retreating. They're actually launching a direct assault." The Overlord blinked. He had not anticipated this. Human tactics had always been scatterbrained, chaotic, inefficient. They relied on brute force, yes, but they were too weak to ever challenge him. Yet here they were, sending everything they had toward his flagship. He stood, his expression turning from amused to intrigued. Perhaps there was more to these humans than he had originally believed. "Let them come," he repeated, his voice cold, this time with an edge of respect. "They will learn quickly that no one can defeat me." Within moments, the space around the flagship erupted in chaos. Dozens of human ships, many of them seemingly outdated models, engaged the Overlord's fleet in a reckless assault. The sight was almost laughable, these fragile vessels charging headlong into the might of his armada. But something was off. The human ships weren't scattering. They weren't panicking. Instead, they moved with precision, coordinating their fire in ways that made the Overlord pause. His commanders began to murmur among themselves. "They're adapting. We've never seen anything like this before." The Overlord's eyes narrowed as he watched the human ships in action. How were they doing this? What tricks had they learned? No matter how many ships he destroyed, more seemed to emerge from the blackness, their movements organized, their firepower precise. He realized, with a growing sense of unease, that this was no ordinary rebellion. These humans, these so-called primitive creatures, were not as weak as he had assumed. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Overlord clenched his fists. He would not be outwitted by mere animals. He would crush them, just as he had crushed so many others before them. But even as he steeled himself for the inevitable victory, a small voice deep within him began to whisper a thought he had never considered. What if these humans were not as inferior as I believed? The battle raged on. The Overlord watched, his arrogance slowly slipping away, replaced by a single, unsettling realization. Humans were not to be underestimated. The Overlord's fortress was impenetrable, or so he had believed. For eons, his empire had crushed any who dared to challenge it. And yet, here they were again. The humans. It had been a matter of simple hubris. He had thought them nothing more than pests, too weak to even comprehend the complexity of his power. But now, their fleets were at the gates of his stronghold, and the unexpected had become reality. They had breached the outer defenses, penetrated his ring of security, and miraculously survived. But the Overlord was not concerned, not yet. His fortress was designed to withstand the mightiest of forces, and his own powers could annihilate any foe who dared to set foot inside. He smiled at the thought of their inevitable failure. Even now, his ships were engaging their pathetic forces in space, wiping them from existence, one by one. Then, as if to confirm his superiority, a single human craft managed to slip through the chaos and land at the heart of the fortress. Its hull was scratched and scorched, yet it was unmistakably human, a ragged, defiant display of survival. The Overlord's generals looked to him, their faces uncertain. The human ships had shown unexpected cunning, but this was a new level of insolence. "Sir," a voice crackled from his console. "We've detected an intruder, human soldiers. They've breached our lower levels." The Overlord's laughter filled the room. "Idiots," he sneered. "The fools think they can take me down. Prepare the cells for prisoners. I'll make an example of them." But as his elite guards raced to intercept, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't retreat. They didn't scatter. Instead, they advanced with purpose, moving swiftly and strategically through the dark halls of his fortress. Each step was calculated, each movement precise. They were organized, methodical, as if they had known the layout of his citadel all along. The Overlord's amusement faltered. He had underestimated them, but there was no time to dwell on that now. He would crush them here in his lair, where they would be nothing more than a fleeting memory. He snapped his fingers, and his elite guard mobilized, 100 strong, to trap and destroy the invaders. Yet even in the face of overwhelming odds, the humans fought with a ferocity that defied all expectations. The Overlord watched as his soldiers fell, one by one. Their weapons were crude, their tactics unrefined, but there was something relentless about them, something that made him stop and think for the first time. Suddenly, a figure appeared on his screen. It was a woman leading the charge. Her eyes were sharp, her face determined. The Overlord studied her, noticing the confidence in her posture as she dispatched his soldiers with a combination of deadly precision and raw strength. She was unlike anything he had ever encountered. She didn't just fight with skill, she fought with purpose. The screen flickered as the woman appeared closer. She spoke, her voice calm but laced with authority. "Overlord, you've made a mistake." His amusement vanished, replaced by irritation. "How dare she speak to me like this?" he thought, before replying coldly. "You think you can defeat me? You are nothing but a flea in my path." Her smile was almost serene. "You're about to find out how wrong you are." Before the Overlord could react, the room filled with the sound of explosions. The walls trembled, and his control room shook as if a seismic wave had struck. His fleet, his pride, was under attack. A coordinated strike, swift and devastating, hit the heart of his empire. His entire armada began to falter. A few ships crumpled, exploding in violent bursts of light. Panic rippled through his commanders. The woman on the screen remained unwavering, her voice soft yet resolute. "I don't think you fully understand, Overlord. We're not here to fight you on your terms. We're here to rewrite the rules." He felt something unfamiliar stir within him. Anger? Confusion? No matter, he thought. He was the Overlord. He had crushed thousands before. He would crush these humans too. But as the realization began to settle, so did another truth. He wasn't sure he could win this time. The fortress shook once more, and the Overlord's attention snapped back to the real-time feed. The woman's soldiers, fierce and relentless, were sweeping through his corridors. They were closing in, and worse still, they had made it to his personal chamber. Without a moment's hesitation, he activated the alarm system and sealed the room. But as the walls began to close, he caught sight of a glint of metal. The woman stood in the doorway, her eyes cold with a fierce determination that sent an unexpected chill down his spine. The Overlord's pulse quickened. In an instant, she lunged, and the battle for his very survival began. The Overlord had never known defeat. Not until now. His once unshakable confidence was crumbling, piece by piece, as he found himself trapped in a cell, a prisoner of the very creatures he had once mocked. The woman who had bested him stood before him, her eyes steady, unblinking. She was not like the other humans. She wasn't just a soldier. She was something more. And as the moments dragged on, the Overlord began to realize that he had underestimated them all. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft hum of the energy field surrounding his containment cell. It crackled in the air, the constant reminder of his impotence. He paced back and forth, his movements rigid and sharp, as his mind raced. How had this happened? How had a species so far beneath him managed to break his fortress, capture him, and force him into this humiliating position? He growled under his breath. This was nothing more than a temporary setback. The human race was weak, their technology primitive. They had not yet begun to scratch the surface of his true power. Soon he would escape. Soon he would crush them. But as the seconds passed, another thought wormed its way into his mind. What if I can't escape? His pride refused to entertain the notion. But his rational mind, the one he had so often silenced in favor of arrogance, forced him to face a reality he could no longer ignore. His escape attempts had all been futile. The cell was beyond his ability to break. His strength, his immense power, was useless against the advanced technology the humans had used to subdue him. What was the point of being a conqueror if a race as insignificant as humanity could strip him of his power so easily? His captor, the woman, returned to the observation window, her eyes cold. But there was something else there, something unexpected. It wasn't just disdain. There was curiosity, almost pity. The Overlord bristled at the thought. Pity? He was no creature to be pitied. He was the Overlord of galaxies, feared and worshipped by countless species. And yet, here he was, a prisoner of those he had once seen as mere insects. She spoke, her voice steady and controlled, but with an undercurrent of something else, something that made the Overlord pause. You're not as invincible as you think, are you? His eyes flashed with fury. You think you've won, human? You're mistaken. I will break free from this cage, and when I do, your species will know true fear. You'll beg for mercy. Her response was calm, almost detached. I don't need your mercy. And I'm not the one who's trapped, Overlord. The words cut deeper than he had anticipated. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even fazed by the magnitude of his threats. The sheer audacity of her indifference grated against him. How dare she? For a moment, he simply stared at her. In her eyes, he saw no fear, only the cold, calculated gaze of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She had beaten him, but she wasn't celebrating. She wasn't gloating. She was focused, as if his capture was just another step toward a greater goal. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze any longer. The realization was starting to settle deep within him, like an insidious poison spreading through his veins. He wasn't the superior being he had once believed himself to be. He wasn't untouchable. He was a prisoner, just another captive in a long list of failed conquerors. He tried to shake the thought away, but it clung to him. Maybe I've made a mistake. A sharp buzzing sound filled the room, signaling the opening of the cell's energy field. The woman stepped forward, and for the first time, the Overlord didn't feel the surge of defiance that had always fueled him in the past. Instead, he felt uncertainty. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she observed him, her expression unreadable. It was as if she were waiting for something, though he couldn't fathom what. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now though still firm. "You're not the first to underestimate us, Overlord. But you will be the last." Her words hung in the air like an executioner's sentence, final and unyielding. The Overlord had no response. What could he say? The empire he had built, the fear he had cultivated, it all seemed so fragile now. How could he have missed the signs? How had he failed to recognize the depth of humanity's potential? She turned, her boots clicking sharply against the metal floor, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Overlord was alone in the silence of his cell. The hum of the energy field around him seemed to pulse louder, as if mocking him. He sank to his knees, his mind still reeling. Was this really the end? Would he, the mighty Overlord, be reduced to nothing more than a footnote in the history of this planet's rise? And in that moment, he realized something he had never considered before. It wasn't just his empire that was fragile. It was he who had become weak. And the most humbling truth of all, it was humanity that had shown him that. The Overlord sat motionless in his cell, his mind swirling in a tempest of conflicting thoughts. The silence around him felt suffocating, a constant reminder of his helplessness. For the first time in his long, violent existence, he was forced to confront a truth he had never entertained. He was not invincible. The humans had done what no other species had dared to try: outsmart him, outfight him, and now they had him at their mercy. But he wasn't ready to submit, not yet. His pride, the very core of his being, would not allow it. He would not be a mere prisoner forever. He had led armies to victory, broken worlds to his will, and he had learned how to manipulate any situation to his advantage. He was a conqueror, and conquerors did not kneel. "If I cannot break free through force," he thought, "then I will use my mind." The door to his cell opened with a soft hiss. He tensed, his eyes narrowing as he prepared for the arrival of the woman, the human who had captured him, the one who seemed to have a strange fascination with his downfall. He had grown to respect her, if only out of a reluctant acknowledgement of her abilities. But respect had never been the same as submission. She entered, her face impassive, but her posture strong, unyielding. She was alone this time, and for the first time since his capture, the Overlord saw the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe it was something more. A quiet understanding, a sense that this was more than just a game for her. The woman did not speak immediately. Instead, she crossed the room and stood in front of the energy field that held him captive, her eyes searching his face as if evaluating him. The Overlord couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She was studying him, and that more than anything else unsettled him. Finally, she broke the silence. "You've been here long enough, Overlord. It's time for you to face the truth. You've lost. Your empire is crumbling. The humans you once dismissed as weak are on the brink of victory. And you are just another prisoner." Her words struck him like a physical blow, but he held his composure. "You think I'll simply accept this fate? I am not like the others you've defeated. I am a god to your kind. And no matter what you've done, I will break free." She looked at him, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the edges of her lips. "That's where you're wrong, Overlord. You've broken every species you've come across, but not us. We're not like your other conquests. And that's why you're here." The Overlord growled in frustration, his rage building. But the woman raised a hand, silencing him before he could speak. "You're not here because you lost a battle. You're here because you underestimated us. You underestimated what humans can do when pushed to the edge." He glared at her, but she didn't flinch. She simply stared back, her expression unreadable. "I'm offering you a choice, Overlord. A way out. A chance to save yourself, and maybe, just maybe, save the remnants of your empire." The Overlord's interest peaked, despite himself. He had expected nothing but mockery. But here she was, offering him an out. What does she want from me, he wondered. He had never been one to take chances, but this was different. He could sense the power behind her words. There was a weight to them, a conviction that spoke of something far more dangerous than the humans he had faced before. "What do you want in exchange for my freedom?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. He would not be swayed by false promises. Her eyes hardened, and for a moment, she seemed to weigh her words carefully. "I want your allegiance, your knowledge, your resources. You see, Overlord, your empire is not what it once was. It's faltering. And I am offering you a chance to change that. If you work with us, if you help us take down your own forces, I will grant you your freedom. You can leave here with the opportunity to rebuild your empire, but on our terms." The Overlord scoffed. "You want me to betray my own people?" "Not betrayal," she said, her voice firm. "An alliance. Your people are losing. You've seen it for yourself. Your empire is nothing but a shell of what it once was. Your pride has blinded you. But we can help you. We can offer you the strength to rebuild. All we ask for is your cooperation, your expertise, your ability to command." The Overlord felt the weight of her words settling on him, and for the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of doubt. Was she right, he thought? His empire was indeed crumbling. His forces were scattered, his influence waning. But if he could forge an alliance, if he could regain even a fraction of the power he had lost. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, his voice quieter now, but no less dangerous. "What guarantee do I have that you won't dispose of me once you've used me?" The woman's eyes softened just slightly, and she took a step closer to the energy field. "You have no guarantees. You never did. But if you want a chance to reclaim everything you've lost, this is the only path forward." The Overlord stared at her, torn between his pride and the desperate desire to regain control. He knew one thing for certain. He could not remain a prisoner forever. And perhaps, just perhaps, this woman was offering him the only chance he had to rise again. His gaze locked with hers, and after a long pause he finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "Very well. I will help you. But know this, human. You are making a dangerous alliance." She smiled, the slightest curve of her lips. "I'll take that as a compliment, Overlord." And so, the bargain was struck. The Overlord sat across from her, a human. Once, the idea of negotiating with a species so beneath him would have been laughable. Yet here he was, not only offering his cooperation, but forming an alliance with the very creatures he had once scorned. His mind churned with the complexity of the situation, a mixture of doubt and intrigue. The woman, his captor, his would-be savior, was a force to be reckoned with. He had to admit, despite his pride, that he had underestimated her from the start. They sat in a war room deep within the heart of his fortress, a place he had designed to command, to crush. Now it felt foreign, as if the walls themselves whispered a reminder of his fall from power. Around them, human soldiers moved with purpose, preparing for their next strike. Their efficiency was something he had never given them credit for, and it unsettled him. There was a quiet strength in their unity, a stark contrast to the chaos he had always thrived in. The woman leaned over the table, studying the holographic map of the battlefield, her eyes scanning the tactical projections with a level of focus that intrigued him. She had been calm, collected, and calculating from the moment she first offered her bargain. But now, as they discussed strategy, she seemed to exude an aura of command that, for the first time, made him question his own leadership. Was this what real power looked like? He had always relied on sheer force, but these humans, they wielded something far subtler. "We're in position," she said, her voice low but commanding. "The last of your fleet is vulnerable, but we can't afford any mistakes. If we strike at the right moment, we can cripple them. They're already weak." The Overlord leaned forward, his fingers curling into a fist on the table. He had led countless assaults, seen the ebb and flow of countless battles, but this was different. He was no longer in control. He was being guided, directed by the very species he had thought to conquer. It rankled, but he could not deny the strategic brilliance behind her plan. "You're certain they won't expect us?" he asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. She looked at him with a steady gaze. "They won't see it coming. Your empire is built on fear and dominance, but we've learned to exploit the cracks. We'll hit them where it hurts, destroy their communication centers, take out their command posts. They'll panic. They won't know how to respond." He nodded, his mind already running through the implications of their plan. It was bold, reckless even, but it held the potential to turn the tide of the war in their favor. The Overlord, for all his previous arrogance, found himself beginning to believe that this might work. The humans had something that his empire had lacked: adaptability. "What's the next step?" he asked, his tone more cooperative now, less defiant. He was beginning to accept his role in this strange new alliance, though his pride still smoldered beneath the surface. "We move in 2 hours," she replied. "Once we hit their power grid, we'll have a window of opportunity. We need you to give us access to your tactical systems. You'll have control, but we'll need to rely on your knowledge to execute the attack. We're not here to play politics, we're here to win." The Overlord could hear the unspoken words in her statement. We're not here to let you fall back into your old ways. It was true. His position was precarious. He was no longer the ruler of galaxies, no longer the indomitable force he had once been. His empire was fractured, its remnants scattered and vulnerable. The woman had made it clear that he could either help her take down what was left of his own empire or remain imprisoned. His future lay in her hands, and as much as it stung, he understood the reality. "You have access," he said, finally relinquishing the last vestiges of his autonomy. "I will help you, but know this: if we succeed, you will have earned my loyalty. If we fail, you will regret ever crossing me." Her eyes locked with his, and for the briefest moment he saw a flicker of something in them. Understanding, perhaps, or maybe a touch of amusement. "We'll succeed, Overlord. We've already won. You're just too blind to see it." The words stung more than he expected, but they were grounded in a truth he had to acknowledge. Humanity's strength wasn't in the raw power of their ships or the weapons they wielded. It was in their ingenuity, their ability to adapt to impossible odds. And as much as it wounded his pride to admit it, that was something his empire had lost. For the first time, the Overlord felt the full weight of his situation. He was no longer the supreme ruler he had once been. He was a tool, a weapon in the hands of the humans he had so long despised. And yet, as much as he hated to admit it, this was his best chance to rise again. "We move in 2 hours, then," he said, his voice firm. "I'll be ready." She nodded and turned to leave, her posture resolute. Before she exited, she paused and looked back at him, her voice quiet but filled with an undeniable strength. "Remember, Overlord, we're not asking for your trust. We're asking for your help. You've already lost everything. Now it's time to rebuild." The words hung in the air, and the Overlord was left alone in the war room, his thoughts swirling. Rebuild, that word, once so foreign to him, now held a peculiar promise. He had once been a conqueror, but perhaps now he could become something more. Whether he liked it or not, the fate of his empire, perhaps even his very soul, was in the hands of these humans. And for the first time he wondered if that was a blessing or a curse. The final assault was upon them. The Overlord stood at the command console, his once pristine armor now scuffed, worn from days of tense preparation. His hands hovered over the controls, his fingers betraying the slightest tremor. The plan had been set into motion. His mind was sharp, calculating every move. But there was something else, a gnawing uncertainty deep inside him. For the first time he was no longer the one in control. The humans, who had once been nothing more than insects in his mind, now held the reins of fate. The woman, the leader of the human forces, stood beside him. Her face was stoic, her gaze fixed on the holographic map that spread out before them. The room around them was filled with soldiers, technicians, and analysts, all working in perfect synchronization. The Overlord couldn't help but feel a pang of something unfamiliar: respect. It was a word he had never considered before, certainly not in relation to humans. But here, now, he had to acknowledge that their discipline, their ability to act as one, was unlike anything he had ever seen. "We're ready," the woman said, her voice calm but laced with determination. "Once we hit their main fleet, their command structure will collapse. We'll have a small window to seize their capital before they can regroup." He looked at her, his eyes narrowed, and for the first time he saw not just a soldier, but a leader, a force of nature. She was everything his empire had lacked. It made something inside him stir, a feeling he had long buried under layers of arrogance and pride. "I should have seen this sooner," he thought. "I should have recognized what they were capable of." "Do you really think they'll crumble so easily?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Despite everything, there was still a flicker of doubt. His empire had been vast, its reach long, and his forces formidable. Could the humans really bring it all down in a single strike? She turned to face him, her expression hardening. "I've seen them fail too many times to think they'll recover this time. They're already on the brink. We're the final blow." He nodded slowly, and for a moment there was a shared understanding between them. They weren't just fighting for victory anymore, they were fighting for survival. If they didn't succeed, everything they had worked for would be lost, and his empire would crush them without mercy. The stakes had never been higher. The battle outside raged on, but inside the command center it was eerily silent. Every soldier, every officer, every analyst knew the weight of the moment. The Overlord could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. His once unshakable confidence had been replaced by a cold focus. There was no turning back now. A soft beep from the console brought him back to reality. The first wave of the human fleet had engaged the remnants of his forces. A series of red dots blinked on the map, representing each ship, each movement, each battle. The enemy was scattering, disorganized. The plan was working. But then something changed. The human fleet had underestimated the resolve of the last of his commanders. They fought back harder than expected, holding their ground longer than anticipated. A message flashed on the screen. Asterisk counterattack initiated. Fleet reinforcement incoming asterisk. The Overlord's heart skipped a beat. His hand hovered over the controls, but he hesitated. This was not part of the plan. The humans had been too confident. They had believed victory was assured. He had to act quickly. "We need to adjust the strike parameters," he said sharply, his voice carrying authority. "Redirect forces to intercept their reinforcements. We cannot let them regroup." The woman beside him didn't flinch. She was already ahead of him, issuing commands to the fleet. She had anticipated this. Everything, it seemed, had been accounted for. The human forces were adapting faster than he had ever imagined. As the battle intensified, the human fleet responded with a level of precision that left the Overlord in awe. His commanders were faltering, and the humans were closing in on victory. The final moments came swiftly, and before the Overlord could fully process the magnitude of what was happening, the last of his forces scattered into the void, their capital ship falling to human fire. It was over. The empire he had built, the one that had once seemed so unshakable, was crumbling before him, shattered by the very species he had thought to destroy. The room fell silent, the weight of the victory settling heavily on the Overlord's chest. The woman stood beside him, her expression unreadable. They had won, but at what cost? "You did it," the Overlord said, his voice hoarse, almost incredulous. He had never expected this, never believed that the humans would bring him to his knees. Her gaze softened, but only for a moment. "We did it, but it's not over yet, Overlord. The real work starts now." He swallowed hard, the enormity of her words sinking in. He had helped bring down his own empire, but he was still trapped in this alliance, trapped in this new reality. The future was uncertain. The past was lost. And now, he was left with one final question. What comes next? As the stars outside the warship faded into the distance, the Overlord understood that his reckoning had only just begun. The woman had not just saved him, she had changed him. And in that moment, he realized he was no longer the same conqueror he had once been. He was something else now, something that might never again return to the empire he had once ruled.